They wonder who stands behind you, whispering strategies in your ear. They wonder who feeds you secrets, who sharpens your resolve, who hides in the shadows as your benefactor. Their confusion is rooted in disbelief, because they cannot comprehend how someone who once stood on the same floor as them now towers so far above it. They cannot see the invisible scaffolding you built through nights of solitude, through sweat dripping when no one applauded, through moments of pain you never shared with a soul. The truth is, the only person helping you is the one in the mirror. The only ally you had was the voice that refused to let you fold. That mystery unsettles them, because if you needed no one, then they are out of excuses for why they are still where they started. They will search for names. They will try to attach you to mentors, to hidden networks, to powerful friends who must have lifted you up. They will whisper about back doors, about favors, about unseen hands moving pieces on your behalf, because their minds are trained to believe success always comes from outside, from connections they did not have, from luck they did not find. When they solve the mystery, when they realize there is no secret patron, no invisible hand, no silent partner feeding you victories, their frustration grows heavier than defeat itself. You force them to face a cruel truth. They had the same hours, the same air, the same chances, and they squandered them while you turned yours into bricks. There is a fear that grips them when they understand the answer, because the answer leaves no room for illusions. If no one helped you, if no one carried you, then your rise is a reflection of sheer discipline, relentless conviction, and brutal honesty with yourself. That terrifies them more than losing to an opponent backed by armies. Because armies can be envied, mentors can be blamed, but self-made progress is a mirror too sharp to look into. It exposes their laziness, their lack of courage, their hunger for shortcuts. It forces them to admit they are not losing to unfair odds. They are losing to their own refusal to change. They remember the times they laughed at you, the moments they dismissed you, the seasons where they assumed you would stay small. And now, the image of you standing tall with no one behind you cuts deeper than any insult could. They realize you weren't waiting for rescue. You were waiting for the right moment to emerge from the furnace you walked into alone. They thought isolation would destroy you. They never expected it would forge you. This realization leaves them empty, because they see you became the weapon they never had the courage to build. They try to rewrite your story. They spread rumors that someone must have carried you. They invent helpers, fabricate alliances, whisper about ghosts in your corner. But their stories never hold weight, because the way you move, the way you speak, the way you stand cannot be borrowed. You walk with the composure of someone who fought his own battles. You carry scars that no one else could have earned for you. And deep inside, they know stories are useless when reality stands in front of them with undeniable proof. When they finally solve the mystery, they realize the very thing they underestimated was your greatest ally. It wasn't a mentor, a benefactor, or a supporter. It was time. You learned to use time differently. You used the hours they wasted gossiping to sharpen your craft. You used the mornings they slept through to lay foundations. You used the nights they filled with distractions to face the brutal silence of your own thoughts. They thought help would come from someone else. You discovered help was hidden in discipline, in focus, in the refusal to bow to comfort. Psychology reveals the simplest truth. They look for helpers because they believe they are powerless alone. They cannot imagine survival without leaning on someone. You shattered that belief by becoming the living contradiction. You show them that solitude is not weakness, it is training. That silence is not emptiness, it is space for growth. That rejection is not death, it is rebirth. The mystery was never about who was helping you. The mystery was about why you never needed help to begin with. That is the kind of revelation that keeps them awake at night. Their envy grows sharper when they see the way people respond to you now. Because your reality holds a power theirs never will. When others stand beside you, it isn't because you begged or schemed. It's because they see value you created alone. Respect earned through solitude carries more weight than approval gifted through favors. They wonder who built your stage, but the truth is you carried your own wood, hammered your own nails, and raised it plank by plank. That stage is not just yours, It is proof of what persistence creates when the world withholds every hand. They are unsettled because you represent a truth they don't want to face. You prove that help is not the deciding factor. You prove that excuses crumble under consistency. You prove that anyone who claims they cannot rise without support is lying to themselves. And once they solve the mystery, once they realize no one stood behind you, they run out of stories to shield themselves. They are left naked in front of their own reflection, forced to ask why they never did what you did. They crafted illusions with care, dressing them up in convincing colors, wrapping them in just enough charm to fool the distracted. They wanted people to see the surface, not the structure. But the flaw in illusions is the same every time. They cannot bear weight. The moment pressure arrives, the mask bends, the paint peels, the hollow frame is revealed. They thought pressure was an enemy you feared, but you welcomed it. You knew pressure is the test that separates the fragile from the unbreakable. They relied on appearances to keep control. You relied on substance to command it. So when storms hit, their illusions collapsed like wet paper, while you stood tall because you had built something meant to endure. They thought lies could hold as firmly as truth. They convinced themselves that if they repeated an image enough, it would become reality. They underestimated how heavy pressure becomes when you are carrying fiction. You didn't need to repeat your story, you lived it. They bent their backs carrying the weight of pretenses, of lies polished and rehearsed. You carried scars, failures, lessons, and rebuilt foundations. The difference is that illusions decay under scrutiny, while reality grows sharper when questioned. Pressure exposes illusions, but it polishes truth. That's why you never feared being tested. They did everything to avoid it. In relationships, they built illusions of loyalty, illusions of love, illusions of permanence. They sold grand words and fleeting gestures, but when tested by time, those illusions broke apart. The first argument, the first disappointment, the first moment where effort was required, their mask cracked. You didn't build love on fantasy. You built it on patterns, on consistency, on the invisible bricks of showing up. When pressure came, their illusions shattered, leaving only excuses. When pressure came for you, it revealed depth, because your foundation was never built to impress but to last. In self-growth, illusions are the false starts, the declarations of change made to gain approval rather than transformation. They announced their progress with volume. You let yours grow in silence. They performed growth in front of others but hid from it in private. When pressure demanded proof, their illusions caved in. They hadn't done the repetitions, hadn't endured the boredom, hadn't faced the nights of doubt. You had. That's why pressure didn't scare you. It confirmed what you already knew. They wore illusions like armor, but under pressure, armor made of glass cuts deeper when it breaks. They feared exposure more than failure. Because failure you can recover from. Exposure leaves nothing to cling to. Pressure exposes the core and illusions have no core. They thought noise could distract from that emptiness, but pressure silences noise. In those moments, all the borrowed confidence, all the exaggerated claims, all the performances crumbled. You had no need to exaggerate because you had evidence. Your work didn't dissolve under weight. It grew more valuable. That was the separation. Pressure demanded proof. You had it. They didn't. They thought you would drown in pressure the same way they did. But you knew pressure was the maker, not the destroyer. You didn't avoid it. You leaned into it. Every trial was another layer, every difficulty another proof of strength. Their illusions always broke when the ground shook, because they built for applause. You built for storms. They wanted attention while it was easy. You wanted strength for when it was hard. Illusions are brittle because they exist only in light. Reality is resilient because it survives in darkness. They convinced themselves appearances were enough to win. They celebrated small victories built on lies, but those victories could not stand under examination. They thought they could rewrite history with illusion. But history is written under pressure, and pressure erases lies like chalk on stone. You endured the same trials, but instead of collapsing, you carved your proof deeper. Every struggle became a line in your record. They had to watch their illusions vanish the second the weight grew too heavy to carry. You learned that pressure is not the enemy, it is the judge. It does not ask who looks the strongest, but who has built to last. Illusions fool the crowd, but pressure fools no one. You built slowly, deliberately. With patience they mocked, with sacrifices they didn't want to make. When pressure arrived, you didn't resist it. You let it press down, because you knew the foundation you had laid could not be shaken. They broke under the same weight that proved you. Their mistake was thinking the game was about being convincing. Your wisdom was knowing the game was about being unshakable. They sold images, you built substance. They lived for admiration, you lived for endurance. That's why they panicked when the curtain dropped and the lights went out. Illusions cannot survive in darkness. Truth does. That is why you are still standing when the stage has collapsed around them. In the end, pressure writes the final story. Illusions make promises they cannot keep. Reality fulfills them without speaking. They trusted illusions because they wanted the easy path. You trusted reality because you knew nothing worth keeping survives without pressure. That's the difference. They crumble when tested. You rise when tested. And now the world sees the truth. Illusions are temporary, but what you built was inevitable. Being an outlier means you stopped asking for permission to exist outside their limits. You became comfortable with being misunderstood, with being doubted, with being envied. You became someone who thrives outside the norm. They wanted you to fear being different, but you turned difference into your weapon. You realize that while they are stuck in a loop, bound by their own designs, you are free to move beyond the circle entirely. You don't just rewrite their design, you render it irrelevant. And irrelevance is what they cannot bear. They will gather and whisper, trying to figure out your new equation. They will call you lucky, call you strange, call you delusional, because they need to explain what they cannot calculate. But deep down, they know luck cannot sustain itself this long, and delusion cannot build results this strong. The truth they cannot say is that you broke their model, and models are everything to them. They cling to order, they cling to control. You exposed that their order was fragile, that their control was only real as long as you accepted the rules. And now that you stepped outside, they cannot follow. You became the anomaly because you stopped feeding them data. You stopped reacting the way they wanted. You stopped living for their validation. You started building without broadcasting, moving without explaining, evolving without apologizing. You left them blind. They can only calculate what they can see, and you no longer show them anything that matters. That silence is more powerful than any confrontation. Silence turned you into the shadow they cannot chart, the player they cannot corner. You live beyond their design, and they cannot survive outside of it.